Hello to the last video for the modeling section. So in this video we're gonna do the UV unwrapping and we're also gonna add the materials. So we're gonna do the last steps we need to do in order to start with the texturing. First of all, I wanna add the materials, and for the materials it's always good to group the materials into logical groups. So for example, let's say we add a material for the head, and one for the body, and one for the clothing, and one for the accessories. So it kind of depends on your character, how many different parts you have on your character. So if, for example, if you have a lot of accessories or you have a lot of clothing on the lower half, maybe it makes sense to group this into one material. But I'm just gonna go ahead and go to the material tab. And then I'm creating a new material, and I'm gonna call this head. And then on the surface, I go to emission, and the color at this moment is not very important. I'm just gonna give it some reddish kind of color. Now, if we switch to the viewport shading, to the material preview, and also the render paths should be combined, then we can see that our head now has the head material. So you can add the materials to your objects either in the object mode, or also you can add them in the edit mode if you select different types of faces and just hit assign. Okay, so I'm gonna add one for the head. I'm also creating one hair material. And that one is gonna be used for all the hairs. If you have very long hair or very complex hair, then it could make sense to add two hair materials, because the more of, let's say, surface, or the more parts you have in the material, the less texture space you're gonna have for the object itself. So if you just have a small object, because all parts share the same texture, and then naturally if you have many parts have to share the same texture as, for example, you have a very small part that just shares the texture. Okay, then I'm gonna create the accessories material. And also the clothing material. Also the body. Okay, and also I'm gonna add a material for the eyes and the inside of the mouth. Now I'm gonna do this just because it is easier to texture them this way in Substance Painter, because Substance Painter is gonna group the imported mesh by materials. So if we're gonna give the eyes and the inside of the mouth, so the tongue and the teeth, if you're gonna give them a separate material, we can just hide everything else and just paint the eyes, so just see the eyes or just see the inside of the mouth. Later on, we can combine them to one material and just have them on the face material. But for now, I'm just gonna give him an eye material. Like that, and the highlights I'm gonna add to the face material. And the inside of the mouth is also gonna get a different separate material. Okay, you might see that the colors are not the same as they are in the surface you picked here. This might be the case because you might still have a different color transform enabled. You can check this under render, and at the very bottom you have color management, and under view transform sometimes there's a filmic or AGX per default. You should change it to standard, and then you see that you get the same colors that you selected. Okay, so the colors you select here for the material right now are not very important. It's just to see what part has what materials. Okay, but I think, oh, this one is still missing. Okay, once that's done, we can do the UV unwrapping. And I would say let's start with the head. For the head, again, we're also gonna unwrap the eyes and the inside of the mouth. They're gonna share the same UV map, even though right now they have a different material. And also keep in mind that we still have the mirror modifier enabled for the eyelashes here. Okay, then let's just select the meshes we want to unwrap. And let's hide everything except for them. If you remember, UV unwrapping is basically the process to map a 3D object into the 2D space. So we can switch to the UV editing tab here. And then for the head, let's just add one seam behind the ear. You can add a seam by hitting Ctrl E and then select Mark Seam. And you see that you have this red line here, which marks the seam. Okay, so you want one seam at the back here. You also want a seam around the eyes, like around the eye hole. And for the mouth, we might have to make a small adjustment here, because what you also want is you want to have a seam directly for one face that is going to act as the border of the mouth. Because a good way to use seams also is to have hard edges. So when we're going to mark a seam here, we can get a hard edge on the texture between this part here and this part. And since we want the texture in a little border, so something, some darker color between the start of the mouth, like the start of the inside of the mouth and the outside. I would like to add one face thick UV seam here. So let's see. I would like to add this maybe here. On that one. So I will drag the lips or slide the edges for the lips to the front here. Slide them down. And this one I'm going to slide back. So roughly that we get an outline or like a face loop like that.